My mother-in-law recently dropped an unexpected bombshell on me. She cheerfully announced that we'd be living together from now on. To accommodate this, we'd convert our house into 2 separate living spaces. Is the house in your name, Judy? I'm sorry to ask, but could you cover the $62,000 bill for renovations? She asked casually. My mother-in-law and my husband found this all rather amusing, but it ignited a fierce resolve within me. I was ready to reveal something significant, something my husband didn't know yet, and I had the evidence. I'm Judy, 27 years old, living in a cozy old farmhouse just outside the city, surrounded by nature. I work in an office by day, and in my free time, I love drawing and sharing my art online. My husband, 2 years older than me, and I have enjoyed a blissful life here since we married, but there's been a regular visitor who's a constant source of stress. Judy, I'm here, open up quickly, came the urgent knock on the door. It's my mother-in-law. I sighed to myself, heading to open it. Although we have a doorbell, she never uses it. Trying to look pleasant, I greeted her with a smile. There are so many bugs here, so annoying. Is Eric still working? Poor thing, even on a Saturday. I brought him some of his favorite food. She talked non-stop as she stood at the door, looking tired and holding a large bag. I kept smiling, trying to keep up with her rapid chatter. This once-a-month visitor, my husband's mother, always made her presence known. As my husband is an only child, his mother feels it's her duty to look after him, a role she's embraced even after our marriage. She regularly offers me advice on managing our household, and during her last visit, she reorganized our entire refrigerator. It made breakfast prep a real adventure the next morning. Before we married, my husband mentioned that if his parents ever needed care, we'd have to live with them someday. Though the thought of leaving our farmhouse saddened me, I'd come to terms with it, but living full-time with my mother-in-law filled me with dread, and I knew my husband wasn't thrilled about it either. 3 years into our marriage, my husband got difficult news. His father had fallen down the stairs, breaking his leg. They'll need our help now, he said. We should live together, like we discussed before. It's important. I was concerned for my father-in-law, but I couldn't ignore my personal worries. Will I still have time to draw? I wondered. Drawing was more than a hobby. It was my creative outlet and stress relief. My husband, perhaps not fully aware of how vital it was for me, only replied, I need you to focus on the house, before heading off to work. Left in my room with my sketches and thoughts, I felt isolated. As I sifted through my art, I wrestled with the idea of moving in with his parents. Just as I resolved to make the best of it, an unexpected twist changed everything. One day at work, I suddenly felt numbness in my hands and feet, followed by severe dizziness. Before I knew it, I'd collapsed. A colleague quickly called an ambulance. Though terrified, I was relieved when doctors told me I wasn't in immediate danger. However, the episode turned out to be a stroke, a shocking discovery at my age. A thorough medical exam confirmed what health checkups had hinted at before. My high blood pressure was a serious issue I'd ignored. The journey from discovering my condition to surgery and recovery took nearly a month, each step happening so quickly it felt surreal. Through it all, I was hurt by my husband's lack of concern. When I called him, shaken and afraid, his response stunned me. Instead of expressing worry, he sounded disappointed. So, living together has to wait, huh? He said. It stung to realize he seemed more invested in our move than in my health. Luckily, my father-in-law was still in the hospital recovering from his fracture, which meant I didn't have to take on his care just yet. This small grace allowed me to focus entirely on my own recovery. Another relief was that we didn't have children, sparing me from additional stress during this time. My mother-in-law's eagerness for grandchildren briefly crossed my mind, but I pushed the thought aside, picking up my sketchbook instead. With all the chaos of preparing to move in with my in-laws and dealing with my health issues, I hadn't had a moment for my favorite escape, drawing. Realizing that this new living arrangement would likely cut into my time for creative pursuits, I decided to treat my hospital stay as an unexpected gift. I resolved to make the most of this solitude by drawing as much as I could, cherishing these quiet moments before the responsibilities of family life inevitably took over. I had already promised myself that I'd do my best for my husband and in-laws, devoting myself to the household and any other needs that came up. The month I spent recovering in the hospital went by in a flash, and soon it was time to return home. My husband offered to pick me up, but I felt a need for some solitude and chose to take the bus instead, feeling a twinge of guilt for turning down his gesture. As the bus rattled along, I looked out the window, taking in the familiar scenery. Sunlight danced through the trees, casting a warm glow across the leaves, but despite the beauty, a sadness crept over me. I was saying goodbye to this peaceful countryside as we were about to move to my in-laws' home, much closer to the busy city. My life was about to change drastically. When I reached my usual bus stop, I got off and began walking toward what I thought was our familiar, cozy home. But as I approached, I froze in shock. Instead of the house I knew, there stood an entirely new, unfamiliar structure. I blinked, confused. I'd only been away a couple of months. I retraced my steps, double-checked the path and the surrounding houses. Everything was as it should be, except for the house itself. With no other option, I hesitantly pressed the intercom. A voice I knew well, my husband's, answered with a casual, "Yes?" Heart racing, I whispered into the intercom, "It's Judy." The front door slowly opened, and there stood my husband, looking relaxed and unconcerned. "Ah, welcome home. You're back earlier than I expected," he said with an easy smile, leaving me to make sense of the drastic changes before me. "I had the whole day off and could have picked you up," Eric continued, oblivious to my stunned expression. "Eric," I cut him off, "what happened to our house? Why does it look so different?" His expression was calm, almost sleepy, as he scratched his head, seeming barely aware of my growing alarm. "Huh? What's going on?" he murmured, dodging my question. Just then, laughter echoed from inside the house. Unable to contain my confusion, I brushed past him and headed straight to the living room. When I opened the unfamiliar door, I found my mother-in-law sprawled on the couch, laughing at the TV. "Why is my mother-in-law here, in this house?" I demanded, bewildered. "Judy, welcome back," she said, smiling as if nothing was unusual. "Hospital stays can be so long, but don't worry, I took care of the house while you were gone." Her words only confused me more. Took care of the house? Every time my mother-in-law visited our old house, she'd complain about the bugs and the long walk from the station. So why had she suddenly made all these drastic changes? I stood there, trying to process not just the physical transformation of our home, but the unsettling shift in our lives as well. Switching off the TV with a sly grin, my mother-in-law turned to me and announced, "Oh, and there's something else I should tell you." She flicked the remote with an air of mischief and continued, "The remodeling wasn't cheap, you know, and since the title to this house is in your name, Judy, I'm afraid you'll need to handle the bill." Her voice held not a trace of regret. Yes, it's $62,000, she added, laughing as if she'd just discussed the weather. The amount hit me like a punch, leaving me breathless and rooted to the spot. I was in shock, watching her laugh, unable to believe what I'd just heard. Just then, my husband walked into the living room, with a glimmer of hope. I went to him, desperate for his understanding, for some support. I recounted what his mother had said, my voice pleading, but he only shrugged, saying dismissively, "Well, that sounds about right. You'll take care of it, won't you?" The sting of his response cut deeper than anything I could have anticipated. When I'd had my stroke, he'd cared more about our living arrangements than my recovery. Now, he was echoing his mother's demands without hesitation. This was it. My frustration and disappointment had reached their breaking point. I took a deep breath and made a decision. "I understand now, Eric. I'm going to divorce you, and your mother, Marilyn. And no, Marilyn, you can handle the renovation costs on your own," I said, my voice steady and resolute. With those words, I turned and prepared to leave, intending to end this painful chapter once and for all. But they weren't about to let me walk away so easily. "I was losing interest in you anyway," Eric said dismissively, his tone as cold as his words. "But remember, this house is still in your name, Judy. You're financially responsible here." "Exactly," Marilyn added with a smirk. "Feel free to leave, but don't forget to pay what you owe." Their arrogance was astounding. I wanted to turn back and confront them, but I steadied myself, took a breath, and responded calmly. "You both keep insisting the house is in my name," I said, turning to face them, "but did you forget that we actually transferred ownership to you, Eric?" I watched as their smug smiles faded. At first, they laughed, assuming I was bluffing, but I reminded them of a detail they'd conveniently forgotten. "Remember when we got married? You insisted we change the title because it would look better if the property were in your name. Back then, I didn't care much about it, so I agreed and transferred it to you without hesitation." Their laughter vanished, replaced by a flash of panic. "I don't remember that," Eric sputtered, eyes darting away. "There's no proof of that anyway." Anticipating his denial, I calmly walked to a nearby drawer and pulled out a file from what used to be our shared space. "Let's see." Here it is," I said, pulling out the documents that listed the ownership. I handed the paperwork to him, pointing to the section clearly stating that the house was, in fact, in Eric's name. His face paled as he scanned the document. "That's a trick. I never thought you'd actually go through with it," he stammered, struggling to keep up the facade, but the tables had turned, and the reality of the situation hit him squarely. "I can't pay that amount. $62,000? Are you serious?" he yelled, his face contorted in disbelief. Appalled by his reaction, I decided there was no point in further discussion. "I think it's best we handle this through lawyers. Marilyn, it seems your son could use your help with this predicament." I gave them one final look and walked away, finally closing the door on their selfish demands for good. I held my composure as my husband's voice grew louder. casting a calm smile at my mother-in-law, who stood momentarily stunned by how events had unfolded. Without a word, I turned my back on them and walked away from their home, for good. In the days that followed, my husband attempted to contact me several times, but I ignored his calls and kept all communication strictly through legal channels. Given the tense relationship we'd endured and my ongoing issues with his mother, the divorce process proceeded smoothly. As for his accusation that the property transfer had been fraudulent, our lawyers confirmed it was a mutual decision made at our marriage 3 years prior. My attorney reassured me that this was neither fraudulent nor illegal. With that confirmation, any doubts I'd harbored finally vanished. I later discovered that my mother-in-law had expected me to pay for the house renovations immediately after my discharge from the hospital, a particularly cold demand considering I'd just undergone surgery and rehab. Yet, the irony of the situation was unmistakable, because the house title was in my husband's name. He alone was ultimately responsible for the hefty $62,000 bill. In trying to trap me, he had unwittingly trapped himself. After the divorce was finalized, I secured alimony, while my husband struggled under a financial burden he could barely manage. With no other options, he was forced to borrow money from questionable sources or face defaulting on the payment entirely. During this time, I received an unexpected apology from my father-in-law, Henry. He hadn't been directly involved in his wife and son's actions, but he expressed genuine remorse, acknowledging his passive role over the past 3 years and the harm caused by his wife's manipulative behavior and his son's indifference. I thanked Henry for his apology, but I knew it was time to let go and move on. With the divorce finalized, my health steadily improved, and I was able to return to work. Drawing, which had once felt restricted during my marriage, was now my source of joy and freedom. I immersed myself fully in my art, finally liberated to create whenever and however I pleased. What had started as a hobby soon blossomed into a new career as commissions began coming in from the social media platform where I shared my illustrations. Now, I spend more time drawing for clients than for leisure. My dream is to buy an old farmhouse in a quiet town and transform it into an art studio. With the alimony in my savings, I feel closer to that dream than ever. Today, I'm on my way to view a farmhouse that might just become my future home and studio. As I look out the bus window, a rush of hope fills me, imagining the life and creative freedom awaiting me. The sunlight filters through the trees, casting a warm, golden glow on the leaves outside, making them look vibrant and alive. This peaceful scene feels like a reflection of my own heart, hopeful, free, and ready for a